Part 1. Introduction. The Problem of Abundance. In Dopamine Nation, Dr. Anna Lembke explores the complex relationship between pleasure and pain in our modern world, which has been transformed from a place of scarcity to a place of overwhelming abundance. This shift has created an environment where highly rewarding stimuli, including drugs, food, news, shopping, and social media, are staggering in their variety, potency, and accessibility. Lembke posits that the smartphone has become the modern-day hypodermic needle, delivering digital dopamine 24/7 to a constantly wired generation. If an individual has not yet found their drug of choice, the current digital landscape ensures it is likely coming to a website near them soon. Central to this exploration is dopamine, a neurotransmitter that scientists rely on as a universal currency for measuring the addictive potential of any experience. The more dopamine released in the brain's reward pathway, and the faster it is released, the more addictive the experience becomes. This biological mechanism was once essential for human survival in a world of scarcity, driving us to seek out food, water, and mates. However, in a world where these rewards are now infinite and effortless to obtain, our ancient neurological machinery is poorly adapted. As Dr. Tom Finucane aptly states, we have become cacti in the rainforest, drowning in a surplus of dopamine that our systems were never designed to handle. Lembke argues that our relentless pursuit of pleasure and our increasing inability to tolerate even minor forms of discomfort have led to a paradoxical rise in unhappiness and physical pain. By constantly seeking a reprieve from the world through various forms of escape, whether it be through trendy cocktails, internet porn, or even second-rate vampire novels, we often add to our problems in the long run. The book aims to unpack the neuroscience of reward to enable readers to find a healthier balance between pleasure and pain. Beyond science, Lembke emphasizes the importance of the lived experience of those most vulnerable to compulsive overconsumption, people struggling with addiction. These contemporary prophets show us who we truly are and offer wisdom on how to survive and thrive in a reward-saturated ecosystem. By combining the science of desire with the wisdom of recovery, the book offers practical solutions for managing compulsive consumption in a world where indulgence has become a primary motive of life. Part 2. The pleasure-pain balance. One of the most remarkable neuroscientific findings of the past century is that the brain processes pleasure and pain in the same location. These two experiences work like opposite sides of a balance, which serves as a central metaphor for understanding how our reward systems function. Imagine a scale with a fulcrum in the center. When the balance is empty, it is perfectly level with the ground. When we engage in a pleasurable activity, such as eating chocolate, scrolling through social media, or gaming, dopamine is released in the brain's reward pathway, causing the balance to tip toward the side of pleasure. The intensity of the pleasure we feel is determined by how far and how fast that balance tips. However, the brain is governed by a powerful self-regulating mechanism known as homeostasis. This biological reflex seeks to keep the balance level. It does not want the scale to remain tipped to one side for very long. Lembke illustrates this homeostatic response through the concept of gremlins, hopping onto the pain side of the balance to counteract the weight of the pleasure. These gremlins represent the brain's effort to bring the system back to equilibrium. The critical problem, however, is that once the balance returns to a level position, it does not stop there. Because of the weight of the gremlins, the balance continues to tip to an equal and opposite amount on the side of pain. This reciprocal relationship is known as the opponent process theory. Any prolonged departure from hedonic neutrality comes with a cost. That cost is an after-reaction that is opposite in value to the initial stimulus. The come-down, or the moment of craving, that follows an intense high. As we repeat these pleasurable behaviors, a process called neuroadaptation occurs. With repeated exposure to the same or similar stimulus, the initial tip toward pleasure becomes weaker and shorter, while the after-response on the side of pain becomes stronger and longer. In the gremlin metaphor, the gremlins become bigger, faster, and more numerous. This leads to the development of tolerance, needing more of the drug or behavior to achieve the same level of pleasure, or experiencing significantly less pleasure at the same dose. Eventually, with prolonged and heavy consumption, the balance becomes weighted chronically to the side of pain. The gremlins are no longer just visiting. They have camped out on the pain side, bringing their inflatable mattresses and portable barbecues with them. At this stage, the individual's baseline has shifted. They are in a dopamine deficit state. They no longer use the substance to get high, but rather to feel normal or level the balance to escape the pain of withdrawal. This state is characterized by an inability to enjoy simple, everyday rewards, a condition known as anhedonia. The good news is that if we can abstain long enough, the brain can usually readapt. The gremlins hop off, and we can re-establish a level baseline where simple pleasures like watching a sunrise become enjoyable again. Part 3. Running from pain and over-medication. The shift in our relationship with dopamine is mirrored by a fundamental change in how we perceive and treat pain. Historically, the medical community believed some degree of pain was healthy. Surgeons in the 1800s were often reluctant to use general anesthesia because they believed pain boosted the immune response and expedited healing. Today, however, the paradigm has shifted entirely. Doctors are now expected to eliminate all forms of discomfort, viewing any pain as a dangerous neurological wound that must be treated immediately. This striving for a pain-free world has transformed the practice of medicine into a system that relies heavily on feel-good pills. Currently, more than 1 in 4 American adults and 1 in 20 children take a psychiatric drug daily. The use of antidepressants, stimulants, and sedatives is rising globally, with the United States leading the trend. Lembke points out a troubling paradox. Many patients use these drugs to compensate for a basic lack of self-care, such as poor sleep or overstimulation, and then attribute the resulting fatigue or anxiety to a mental illness. This logic necessitates more drugs, turning what should be poisons into vitamins. Evidence suggests that long-term use of these medications can lead to tolerance and tardive dysphoria, where antidepressants might actually make depression worse over time. This culture of pain avoidance extends beyond the doctor's office into parenting and education. Modern parents, often terrified of leaving an emotional scar on their children, have over-sanitized childhood. By protecting children from every minor adversity and bolstering their self-esteem with false praise, we may be raising a generation that is deathly afraid of challenge and entitled to constant pleasure. We have raised children in the equivalent of a padded cell, leaving them without the tools to ready themselves for the realities of the world. Furthermore, our constant need for distraction has made us intolerant of boredom. As Aldous Huxley and Neil Postman warned, our appetite for unreal and irrelevant distractions is nearly infinite. In a digital age, we are exhausting avoiding ourselves by staying plugged into podcasts, social media, and playlists every waking hour. Lembke argues that boredom is actually an essential opportunity for discovery and invention. It creates the necessary space for new thoughts to form, allowing us to be within our lived experience rather than merely reacting to external stimuli. The data shows that despite unprecedented wealth and medical advancement, people in rich nations are reporting being less happy and in more physical pain than ever. Americans, in particular, report more bodily aches and pains than any other country. Lembke suggests that the reason we are so miserable is precisely because we are working so hard to avoid being miserable. By constantly leaning on the pleasure side of the balance through medication and distraction, we have effectively reset our neural set points to the side of pain, making us more vulnerable to suffering in the long run. Part 4. The Dopamine Framework for Recovery. To help patients navigate the treacherous waters of modern overconsumption, Dr. Lembke developed a practical, step-by-step framework represented by the acronym Dopamine. This process is designed to help individuals regain a level pleasure-pain balance by resetting their brain's reward system through intentional intervention and self-reflection. The first step is data. Before making any changes, one must gather the simple facts of their consumption. What are they using? How much? And how often? This sounds straightforward, but addiction thrives in secrecy and denial. Often, patients are surprised to see the actual numbers once they track them. Next is objectives. This involves identifying the why behind the behavior. Is the substance or behavior used to experience a high, or is it a way to escape boredom, anxiety, or physical pain? Understanding the job the drug is doing in one's life is crucial for finding healthier alternatives later. The third step is problems. This requires an honest assessment of the negative consequences. Overconsumption often leads to dopamine-induced problems, such as irritability, social isolation, and financial strain, that the user might paradoxically be trying to treat with more of the same drug. The most critical and difficult step is abstinence. Lembke recommends a 30-day dopamine fast. This period is necessary because it takes about 4 weeks for the brain's gremlins to hop off the pain side of the balance and for the natural dopamine receptors to upregulate. The first 2 weeks are usually miserable, marked by withdrawal and intense cravings, but by the third and fourth weeks, most people begin to feel better, experiencing a restoration of their baseline mood. During this period, mindfulness is essential. Instead of running from the discomfort of withdrawal, the individual learns to sit with it, observing the cravings like waves that eventually break and recede. This leads to insight, the next step. Once the brain is no longer clouded by constant dopamine spikes, the individual can see the true cause and effect of their behavior. They realize that the very thing they thought was helping them was actually the source of their misery. With a clearer mind, the person moves to next steps. They must decide whether they want to remain abstinent indefinitely or attempt to reincorporate the behavior in moderation. Finally, the framework concludes with experiment. This is the process of moving back into the world with a new plan. If the person chooses moderation, they must implement strict self-binding strategies to prevent the balance from tipping too far again. This framework is not just for addicts in the traditional sense. It is a tool for anyone living in a dopamine-rich world. It teaches that the path to a balanced life isn't found in a pill or a quick fix, but in the patient work of resetting our biological scales and learning to live authentically within our own skin. Part 5. Self-binding strategies. While the 30-day dopamine fast is a powerful tool for resetting the brain's baseline, maintaining that balance in a world designed to trigger overconsumption requires more than just willpower. Willpower is a finite resource. It is like a muscle that gets tired with use. To protect ourselves from the constant barrage of high dopamine stimuli, we must employ self-binding strategies. These are intentional barriers we create between ourselves and our drug of choice, while we still have the cognitive capacity to make a rational decision. By creating these obstacles, we press the pause button between the initial desire and the final action. Lembke categorizes self-binding into three main types: physical, chronological, and categorical. Physical self-binding involves creating literal, tangible distance. This might mean keeping a smartphone in a timed kitchen safe, deleting addictive apps, or removing all junk food from the pantry. For someone struggling with alcohol, it means not keeping liquor in the house and avoiding routes that pass a favorite bar. The goal is to make the drug harder to access, forcing the brain to exert more effort to consume, which often provides enough time for the rational prefrontal cortex to override the impulsive reward system. Chronological self-binding uses time-based limits. This involves restricting use to specific windows, such as only on weekends, only after 8 p.m., or only for 1 hour a day. This strategy acknowledges that for many, total abstinence may not be the goal, but unrestricted access is a recipe for addiction. By setting clear time-out periods, we prevent the gremlins from camping out on the pain side of our balance. However, Lembke warns that this requires strict discipline, as the brain will often try to make up for the restricted time by binging during the allowed windows. Categorical self-binding involves sorting dopamine into subtypes and restricting entire categories that trigger the reward cycle. For example, a person addicted to online gambling might need to avoid all sports news or fantasy leagues because those categories are slippery slopes leading back to the primary addiction. Similarly, someone addicted to social media might allow themselves to use LinkedIn for work, but strictly ban Instagram and TikTok. This helps the brain distinguish between healthy dopamine, necessary for functioning, and junk dopamine, purely for escape. These strategies are essentially a way of acknowledging our human frailty. We are not as strong as we think we are when faced with a flashing screen or a sugary snack. By pre-committing to these boundaries, we are essentially binding our future selves to the decisions made by our current, rational selves. It is a form of metacognition, thinking about our thinking, that allows us to navigate a dopamine-saturated environment without constantly being at the mercy of our primitive instincts. Self-binding isn't about punishment. It is about creating a sanctuary where our brains can function at their best. Part 6. Pressing on the pain side, hormesis. While most of modern society is focused on avoiding pain and seeking pleasure, Dr. Lembke introduces a counterintuitive path to balance, intentionally seeking out discomfort. This concept is rooted in the science of hormesis, which refers to the biological phenomenon where exposure to low to moderate doses of noxious or stressful stimuli results in beneficial effects for the organism. In the context of the pleasure-pain balance, if we press on the pain side of the scale, the brain's homeostatic mechanisms, those gremlins we discussed earlier, will naturally hop onto the pleasure side to restore equilibrium. When we seek out external pleasures, like eating sugar or scrolling through social media, we get an immediate hit of dopamine, followed by a longer-lasting dip into pain, the come-down. However, when we do something difficult or painful, like taking a cold shower, exercising intensely, or practicing deep concentration, the process is reversed. We feel the pain first, but as a result, our brain's compensatory mechanism releases dopamine and other feel-good chemicals, like endorphins and serotonin, to bring the balance back to level. Because this dopamine is produced internally by the body's own regulatory system, it is more stable and longer-lasting than the dopamine triggered by external substances. It doesn't lead to the same crash or craving. Lembke highlights exercise as one of the most effective ways to press on the pain side. Exercise is immediately toxic to cells, causing an increase in temperature, oxidation, and tissue damage. Yet it is precisely this damage that triggers the body's repair mechanisms, leading to increased physical and mental resilience. Studies show that exercise provides a sustained increase in dopamine levels that lingers long after the activity has ended, effectively raising the user's baseline mood. Another powerful example is the use of cold water immersion. Research has shown that a cold plunge can lead to a 250% increase in plasma dopamine concentrations, a spike comparable to that produced by cocaine. But instead of a quick peak and crash, the levels remain elevated for hours. This indirect way of obtaining dopamine is much more sustainable for the brain. However, Lembke adds a crucial warning. Even pain can be dopaminized. In our dopamine-saturated world, some individuals may begin to chase the high of the pain response, leading to compulsive behaviors like overexercising or self-harm. The goal of pressing on the pain side is not to seek extreme suffering, but to find a manageable level of daily work that keeps the pleasure-pain balance flexible and responsive. By intentionally leaning into the wind of discomfort, we actually strengthen our capacity to experience joy, as we are no longer constantly running from the inevitable gremlins of life. This practice builds psychological calluses, allowing us to navigate a difficult world with a more resilient and balanced mind. Part 7. Conclusion. Radical honesty and immersion. In the final section of Dopamine Nation, Dr. Anna Lembke synthesizes the neurobiological lessons of the pleasure-pain balance into a philosophy for daily living. She argues that surviving the age of indulgence requires more than just biological resets or physical barriers. It requires a fundamental shift in how we interact with the truth and how we engage with our immediate reality. The two pillars of this final stage of recovery and maintenance are radical honesty and immersion. Radical honesty is the practice of telling the truth about everything, large and small, especially regarding our hidden behaviors and consumptive habits. Lembke points out a fascinating neurological link between truth-telling and the brain's reward system. Lying is a complex cognitive task that often triggers the release of stress hormones and can inadvertently keep the brain in a state of high alert or dopamine seeking. Conversely, telling the truth, especially when it is difficult, strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for delayed gratification and executive function. By being honest about our struggles, we build pro-social dopamine through authentic connection with others. This intimacy acts as a natural buffer against the lure of cheap dopamine, as it fulfills a deep-seated human need for belonging that substances and digital distractions can only mimic. Honesty also grounds us in reality, preventing the double life that so often fuels compulsive overconsumption. The second pillar, immersion, addresses our tendency to use dopamine as an escape from the mundanity or difficulty of life. In a world where we can opt out of any boring moment by glancing at a screen, we have lost the art of being present. Lembke suggests that instead of running away from the world through various forms of intoxication, we must turn toward it. This means finding flow in ordinary activities, cooking a meal, cleaning a room, engaging in a difficult conversation, or performing focused work. By fully immersing ourselves in the unrealized potential of the present moment, we stop treating life as something to be endured between hits of dopamine. Lembke concludes by reminding us that the goal of a balanced life is not the total elimination of pleasure, but the restoration of a healthy relationship with it. When our dopamine scales are level, we are once again capable of experiencing the small joys of a life lived in increments. We regain the ability to be moved by a sunset, a quiet walk, or a simple meal. This state of hedonic neutrality is where true contentment resides. It is a place where we are no longer running from the gremlins, but have instead learned to coexist with them, understanding that the pain they bring is often the very substrate from which lasting pleasure is grown. The ultimate lesson of Dopamine Nation is one of humility and awareness. We must acknowledge that our brains are ancient hardware operating in a high-tech software world. By respecting the laws of the pleasure-pain balance, practicing self-binding, embracing necessary discomfort, and committing to radical truth, we can find a way to navigate this world of abundance without losing ourselves to it. Recovery is not a destination, but a continuous practice, a daily choice to remain present, to stay honest, and to find beauty in the balance. In doing so, we move from being cacti in the rainforest to resilient individuals capable of flourishing in any environment.